Hello, everyone. Welcome to the new Esoteric interview series. The purpose being to expand perspectives and to study the many different ways magic is being practiced. Today, we're interviewing my friend Jin, a Tantric Buddhist, Kabbalist, and sorcerer of the Grey Lodge. He is also the host of the podcast Threshold Saints, described as speculative magic in the aeon of the daughter. I would absolutely recommend checking them out, especially if you're interested in people discussing their practices and throwing ideas around. But they also have a lot of meta discussions around Tantra and Kabbalah, astrology, current events, all sorts of things, really. They hold a Gnostic Mass space on X every other Friday. I believe, is that right, Jin? Friday, right?
That is correct. Friday night Gnostic Mass, of which Eros has been a part. We were just speaking about it, but 3 times. So thank you so much, Eros, for showing that
Yeah.
up. We loved having you, and I love having you as a co-host as well.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. Those are always so fun. Last week, and these spaces also get later uploaded to YouTube and Spotify, so you can check them out there as well if you missed them. And then last week they discussed like a lot of herbology, I believe the purpose was uh, a discussion of what herbs every sorcerer should have in their garden, and they discussed how they've applied them to their lives or to help others. So definitely check them out. Their links are in the description, or at least Jin's and Threshold Saints. Would you say that that's a fair representation, Jin?
That was an excellent. That was an excellent intro. Thank you so much, Eros. Yeah, check out Threshold Saints. It's a really cool show. I'm proud of it. I'm proud of all the co-hosts that have come on with me to do episodes and all the sort of meta work, meta ontologies that we do that I've discussed and like done on my own. But also, it's the show was about me meeting people. It was about my like creating a nexion or the nexus or connections or ipsos. So I feel like I've done it, at least in part. So really that's what it's about. It's about the group chat. It's about all the people that have been on, all the guests and all the co-hosts, and the conversations like this, like being able to discuss magic quite openly and without reservation, I guess you could say. And then the Grey Lodge Spaces started out because I sort of had run the gamut of IG podcasts and like all the conspiracy podcasts, all the esoteric podcasts of a certain size, I had been a guest on. And I just wasn't I had all these ideas, Eros. That's what it was, is that I wanted to do this series called Aeon of the Daughter. That was really my sort of I guess you could say my greater project. And so for me, doing the Grey Lodge allowed me to expand my, you could say, ontological territory. And so I was able to sort of be very speculative, really show, really demonstrate sort of speculative Kabbalah in a way that nobody was really speaking of at that moment. And this was the pre Nick Land, pre all of that, pre um, everything. People used to laugh and call us like Jewish because we would have the Kabbalah spaces. We were doing like a book club, which we still do sometimes for the Grey Lodge, but we were doing it like very hardcore. We would do Friday night Gnostic Mass, and then every Saturday we would go into like full on 3 hour books of like different things, Taoism, Kabbalah, sorcery, but I would always come back to this kind of speculative Kabbalah. So the Grey Lodge actually allowed me to become a much better Kabbalist, and also allowed me to meet people like Solar, like Matt, like Joshua, like yourself, who pushed me, sometimes adversarially. I mean, Matt's never adversarial, but you know, uh, He's my buddy, of course. I mean, they all are, but the yeah, they pushed me, and I had to really, really, really sort of reassess myself and say, like I have this very niche tantric knowledge, but really I am interested in speculative Kabbalah. And I'm particularly interested in medieval Kabbalah. So that the spaces really allowed me to grow. And I would say they actually allowed me to develop more who I wanted to become, at least a little. So that's pretty much it.
So interesting. I know I feel very privileged myself to be able to talk to so many experienced practitioners like yourself and to be able to have these discussions. So I do really appreciate you coming on. You just said, and you said medieval Kabbalah. How is that different from modern Kabbalah? Like, do you feel like you must feel like it's degraded over time?
Well, this is the thing is that everything was sort of you and I have even discussed this on other shows and when we've paneled together is this kind of reformation in the 18th century of like hermeticism and modern what we'll say is contemporary like what the Western contemporary tradition, contemporary Western magic. And so of course Kabbalah as I call it, um, it was also reformulated for the modern sort of like I would say neo-Gnostic or like maybe post-Christian or maybe Christian. Of course, there is Christian Kabbalah too, which I'm very interested in. Like Pico has played a big influence on how I understand the tree and how I continue to practice speculative Kabbalah. And I also have to say, like recently, doing I've been in dialogue with David Hyam Smith, who just did an episode on my show, Threshold Saints, and people can check that out. He's probably one of the greater speculative Kabbalists of our time. So I've been it's a huge privilege for me to be able to do that and to have like both public and private discussions with him. And then also, Matt's a very excellent Kabbalist. Solar's a very excellent Kabbalist. I know he doesn't always love to admit it, but he is. And so it was like I have to develop like a niche. But to be honest, my original interest in Kabbalah was also medieval. So there's a rabbi called Rabbi Cordovero. He wrote many pretty much hundreds of tractates, commentaries, texts, and he is considered pretty much the greatest sage of Kabbalah, like at least the OG. He's like, if you want to use a Tantric Buddhist example, he is like the Longchenpa of Kabbalah. So I read a 13 part book. So okay, this is what happened, Eros. This is what I'll explain it proper. So I'm sorry, I'm kind of meandering. I was really into Tantra for several years. And I was always into Buddhism, but I was very focused on my tantric practices. I recognized that I was having experiences in those practices that were relatable and perhaps even understandable in Kabbalistic terms. So I realized I actually had to learn Kabbalah, and so I read Ramak. And I don't know why I chose that. I I kind of go with I'm a very I kind of go with my feelings. I'm not feelings as in like Yesod, like the vibe or like Netzach or like I want or I desire. It's like almost like a flash of insight and not necessarily like like it's not like lightning flash necessarily, but it's something. I tend to go with it in certain things, not everything. Most of the time I actually ignore it, but in certain things I do. And I was glad I did in this way. So it gave me a foundation, a true foundation of understanding the tree from a kind of a Hebrew perspective, but it because I'm not Jewish and I'm not Christian even, I always was able to think of it very fluidly and very flexibly. And I wasn't fixed for me. And also, I believe that the tree exists in other systems. So this is something you might want to we might discuss. But I believe the tree does exist in other systems. I'm not the only one who thinks that. David Hyam Smith also thinks that. Um, there are trees that look like trees. There are trees that use poetry, like poetic meters, to describe the Sephira instead of it being like laid out in a cartographic map with boundaries. Um, there's all sorts of ways. There's a system called the Mahavijjas, which is a grouping of 10 goddesses. Yes, that's right. You heard me. 10, just like the Sephira. That's actually how I really started, was I mapped out these tantric goddesses onto a tree using the Sefer Yetzirah. So this is a little contentious. Not everyone loves the Sefer Yetzirah. Some people prefer to like form their basis of their opinions in the Zohar. But I always thought the Sefer Yetzirah kind of understands the universe in like an interesting, at least an interesting way. But I also thought, yeah, likely true, speculatively true. So, and it gives you an astrological basis too. So it's somewhat like there's a material element where you're looking at the cosmos. So I used the tantric astrology, of which I know a little bit about, to map it these goddesses, which are also, I mean, it's very similar. It's clearly something older, or it's something primordial, or it's something perennial, or it's something that perhaps is just a place that we go that we understand in a speculative way. And so there's different ways, and different cultures and different religions have different ways to describe um, the landscape. And so the landscape for me was populated with these goddesses, also related to Sephra. And I began mapping it out. And I wasn't the first to do so in terms of the 10 goddesses, but I was the first to use, I was the first to arrange it in the way I did. The way I arranged it was quite radical and very different. And it had to do with because I'm a Tantric Buddhist, not like a Tantric Indian, I don't practice Indian Tantra. I practice like Buddhist Tantra. So it changed the nature of how I understood the goddesses to be. And it also changed the formulations of how I mapped them to the Sefer Yetzirah. Because I understood that there are densities. It's even described as having, like, the goddesses are described in sort of a way to have densities, much like the Sephirah. So there can be 5 layers. And so there are also 5 layers in a certain kind of tantric understanding. So I began to see the layers, apply it using, for me, the Sephira are largely color and conceptual idea. So I always sort of, though that's what I relate to the most strongly. So I basically did this while you're doing this kind of exercise. It's like a speculative exercise, but it's also kind of a Sephirotic journey. Like you're kind of having, I don't want to say visions. It's not really like that. It's not like psychic visions but yes, if you're incorporating like your regular daily practices in that, like meditation and mantra recitation and visualization and deity yoga and all of that, the tree sort of unfolds before you, is my experience. It's just my experience. And I am a more of a experiential Kabbalist, and I've talked about this a little before, and a speculative Kabbalist, meaning that I understand the Sephira not necessarily through text itself, although I emphasize that text is extremely important. It should relate to the experiences you're having rather than you're having like wild experiences and then there's no relationship to the text. No, it should be wisdom, excuse me, should be wisdom and understanding together. Bina and Hokmah together. So that's sort of how I understand the tree. And so the I don't know where I was really going with that. I apologize, but I think that Kabbalah is very misunderstood of what it is and like what kind of relationship it has with other religions. And like Vanessa's in the chat, and I'll just shout her out. I saw Cassandra, and both lodge members, of course, very valued people. And so basically, that I think it exists in so many things, and it's able to be understood in different layers, and but also phenomenologically. Like the whole point of Kabbalah is not to understand like the phenomena of the world, because the phenomena of the world, I'm not necessarily saying it's only like a like exclusive domain of your mind, but I think it largely begins and ends in your mind. And so you kind of recognize that what really matters to understanding reality or meta reality or magic is actually in your mind, but it's also your perception of things and phenomena. So,
Mhm.
like I love to say, this was before I had David M. Smith on my show, and even before I read his series of books, Code of the Lightning Flash. But I always likened it to a lightning flash because that is kind of the idea. That is kind of the idea of what God is. It's when you are standing in perception, looking at this thing that is both turquoise. It's usually like lightning usually occurs in the darkness. So it's like the darkness of night, but the darkness of night isn't black. It's actually blue. And interestingly enough, turquoise can also be clear, meaning like clear as in the sky, or like water. This is a metaphor that is often given in both Tantra, Buddhist Tantra, and also Kabbalah. So you see these similarities. You see this kind of like turquoise and lapis lazuli interplay, day sky and night sky. And then you have this idea of the flashing lightning or flashing thunder or diamond thunder, which is really clear. Like if you're like really thinking like, yes, it flashes blue and that's important, but it's sort of like your perception of understanding. Like you're standing there looking at the lightning flash and you're saying, this isn't God. You're not going to pray to the lightning flash, but it's allowing you a bit of insight into sort of the miracle or splendor of the universe. And that's sort of the point is like it starts in your mind. So you make sure you get your mind right through meditation, through, um, all the different practices, and start working on the tree. So I actually, my first podcast that I ever did was discussing this exact thing, like mapping the Mahavijjas, the 10 goddesses, onto the tree of life. And so while you're recording, you're having like I was having Sephirotic experiences, or in my case, it was more with the goddess, quote unquote goddesses, Dakinis. And so I was having it wasn't like visions or anything, but there's elements of that. Like you're seeing colors and conceptual ideas, and things are sort of being revealed the more you discuss it on air. And of course, recording is kind of magical, right? Like there's a bit of a lightning flash right here, right now, with what we're doing, not just on using technology, but also in our dialogue. Like the ability to have a dialogue with each other through time and space, something magical about that. And then people also listening, perceiving it, very important. So I realized that it was very magical, and people would write me. I was like a nobody. Like I'm still like I don't want people to think like I think I'm anything. I definitely don't. I only speak for myself. As Eros said, I'm just a sorcerer on the carnal ground, a monkey king on the carnal ground. I only speak for myself.
You are always very humble, but you do know a lot. Very
I'm smart.
knowledgeable.
Thank you, Eros. I appreciate that. I'm very
I
smart.
I
I
think
know
it's
that
so
though.
cool though that you kind of bridged the Kabbalah and Tantra together through those goddesses, and that's a very interesting bridge that I'm sure people listening will also find interesting and might be drawn to. Um, and then you mentioned Diamond Thunder. Is this, would you say, is that idea like um, a lightning bolt of idea or differentiation, expansion type of thing, and then that's going through the diamonds, like through Venus and coming out?
Yes.
Because that's what I'm imagining.
Yes, that's what everybody should imagine when I say diamond thunder. It's the lightning strike, the lightning flash, as you so eloquently put it. And it is passing through, yes, the diamond of Netzach or Venus. But in Tantra, the interesting thing is we would actually understand the diamond to explode, self combusting through the lightning strike, which is also our perception. So we would imagine it both exploding, and then when we want to create something, you bring it back together, free of aggregates, because it's a diamond, right? It's pristine clarity, It's just light, refracted maybe, but still light. So you don't want to create any klipas, or as we would call it in Buddhism, skandhas, which are the same thing. Both the words mean aggregate. So I do think that it is interesting because I am, obviously, you know this, but I'm mixed race. So I always joke on the Friday night spaces that I am like, it took a Hapaborean, a true Hapaborean, to sort of bridge that gap between like the Eastern and Western. Like I had to embody the Hermetic ideal in a way. And because like I'm not like, Hermeticism usually goes in that more androgyny direction. I'm very much a man. So for me, the way I embody maybe that Hermetic, I'm not a Hermeticist and I would never classify myself as one, but maybe maybe I can ride the polarities in myself because I'm biracial. So that's how I know that sounds like a bit like a Twitter bit, and of course my like quote unquote Asian identity is part of Twitter and part of my Twitter persona, but it is actually, I would say, a fundamental way I understand, like how I relate to magic is through sort of like that, um, like resolving the resolution of paradox. That's really the goal of every great Kabbalist, is to resolve all paradox.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. I mean, almost like you had to grow up integrating, and so it just became something that you understood very well. And I think the Venus exploding from the lightning is kind of interesting too, because, I mean, really, in order for something new to be created, you do have to have that fragmenting of sorts.
Well, even if you think of it as the diamond staying stable, which is that's a fair view as well. You can imagine it as the diamond staying stable, but the light refraction changes. So the way it becomes resplendent or splendorous in the world is what the Sephiroths actually are, the Sephiroth. So it is the actual light. That's how I sort of understood Eros, the relationship between the Sephiroth and the goddesses. Because in Buddhist Tantra, we say dakinis are perfectly non dual, they're empty. Empty doesn't mean nothingness, it means luminousness and masslessness, very much like a star. And so the Sephiroth can be understood, and they can be understood. This is not necessarily the most traditional way. Obviously, there are the more traditional Hebrew way is to understand only two Sephiroth as being feminine. But I actually understand them all to be feminine and all to be masculine. I think they have both. I don't even think it's necessarily like a density question of like, oh, the deeper you go, like who are you going to see, what deity forms, what names, what conceptual ideas, what colors. Sure, you could absolutely make an argument relating to the goddesses and saying like, yeah, the Shakti, or the wife of God, is the higher principle, and certainly in Tantra that is true in a way. But I would say that there's a layer beyond that, even like obviously as a Buddhist, and I would say that that's the Diamond Thunder layer. So I know I was kind of complicating what you asked me, or what I was responding to, but really you have to think of them as negative space, and you have to be able to resolve them conceptually, even in the face of adversary or contradiction. So I like the goddesses because they are very quote unquote real in a way. Like in Buddhism, the masculine deities exist more in the practice. That's not to say that they're not real. They are real to a degree, but they arise in your own mind. Okay. So the existence appearance that they take is very much dependent on you, the upasaka, as the practitioner, as the visualizer, as the mantran, as the person reciting the mantra. That's where male deities arise. Female deities, not all female deities, but female dakinis actually are self-arising, meaning they kind of already exist, and we kind of just have to tap into them. So it's actually maybe a cheat code, you could say, to quote Mamara. It's a little cheat code to access the Sephira, maybe the deepest layer. that one can actually access without sort of, it's like me, I accidentally stumbled on the tree. So maybe that was why. Maybe the, as we like to joke in the chat, like the skywives, maybe the skywives like saw me and they were like, oh yeah, Jin's pretty schwy, he's cool. And so they gave me like a cheat code in a way. It doesn't mean that your knowledge is perfect just because you experience the tree. It just means that you're able to sort of understand it preconceptually, meaning you don't really have any material basis, no textual basis to form your ideas. And so I think it's a strength and a weakness, because it's a strength because you're not really polluted or aggregated, or you're not holding like specific conceptual ways of thinking of how this should work. And like that goes back to the question about Hermeticism versus medieval Kabbalah. There's a big difference between medieval Kabbalah and Hermetic Kabbalah. Hermetic Kabbalah tends to be very fixed. They tend to see the letters, the Hebrew letters, as being of the paths and on the paths, which is true, but the paths are not, the letters aren't fixed in the paths. The whole idea is that the letters, or the logos, travels through the paths as light. So it should always be dynamic. And I'm not saying the Hebrew tree is inherently more dynamic, but obviously that is an element where it is. But I would say the tantric element of like looking at the Mahavijja grouping, that specific grouping of 10 goddesses, and if you want to make the argument that this is another tree or another version, I personally think it is. People can think what they want, but there is a lot. You can make a very interesting material argument that's based in history, that's based in like regional sort of syncretism. And I would argue that yes, the Mahavijja grouping is a form of the tree. And it depends how you understand it and how you approach it. So one of the things, I should have probably mentioned this, was one of the things that a lot of people on the left-hand path tend to do is focus on Kali. Everybody knows that goddess. Everybody knows that goddess. Every single person, every occultist, even every like love and light normie, like witch, whatever. They all know Kali. But Kali is just one goddess of the 10, and each goddess has an interrelationship with not only each other, but also the male deity, or quote unquote God, also in your mind. But so they tend to focus on Kali. But Kali is not inherently, like, certainly for Buddhism, she's not the primary focus, and she's certainly not the primary focus in another tantric system called Sri Vidya. So I actually read a few Sri Vidya Tantras, as well as some of the Kali Kola texts, and I came to my own conclusion, and I sort of mapped it out that way. Whereas the previous sort of styles of this cross-cultural um, Kabbalah, excuse me, uh, was focused on Kali. Now I agree with some of those trees, and that Kali should be placed at Binah, and because she is related very, very, very closely to Saturn and time, and the destruction of which, that's really what her secret meaning is, if you want to call it that. Her secret meaning is the destruction of time. And this is often why she's depicted on standing on her husband's corpse, Shiva's corpse. But I realize that she is not for me, in the way that I look at the tree, which is obviously Buddhist, middle pillar, but also tantric. I realize that it's actually the dialectical relationship between Bina Hogma, and also the relationship, of course, with Keter. So the way that the Mahavijja grouping describes this relationship is that Kali is opposed by a goddess called Dhumavati. And when I'm saying opposed, I mean she just goes in the opposite, Sephra, Hokmah, and she is the dissolution of smoke. So Kali is there. She's drawing things into density like a giant magnet, like polarize, like bringing everything into density, like lead, like how Saturn is very closely associated with lead. It's the very, very dense. So you're dragging everything through its karma very quickly. That's the whole idea of Kali. You're moving through all your negative karmas very, very quickly, but you might get stuck. So that's also why she brings things into destruction, meaning the flesh, the physical. But we are not just physical. We are actually also spirit. So that's where Dhumavati comes in. She actually destroys the spirit. But when I'm saying destroying, it's not really destroying. It's just that she um, relates to matter as sort of the opposing or adversarial force to Kali. So by understanding that these two have a dialectical or dialogical or sort of like a oppositional nature or oppositional polarities to each other, because Kali can in Kabbalah, Binah is described as the devouring mother. Well, that fits Kali quite well. Kali is not necessarily a mother in Tantra, though. So let me just say that for any left hand path people listening, but she can be.
Another
And
parallel to Saturn.
correct. And Dumavati is a widow. So this is a really interesting Kabbalistic parallel because Hokmah is usually assigned the masculine, and it's usually described as the father, unmanifest in wisdom. So this is another really interesting thing is Mahavijja means greater wisdom. Maha, greater, Vijja means wisdom. Hokmah also means wisdom. So you can see the way I experienced the tree, Hokmah was feminine. But it doesn't mean that the Sephira is fixed in femininity. It just means that I experienced that density of it. So I was able to sort of reconcile this polarity between matter and spirit, and sort of by relaying it to the Sefer Yetzirah and Tantric astrology, understand like what is the body doing, what is the spirit doing, what is coming, like the light that's coming down from Keter, what is that doing? And also the idea in Tantra is climbing upwards. It's a big part of how I understand the tree personally, is you look upwards. This is not how Hebrew Kabbalah is understood. It's humility and like, yeah, that's great and all that stuff. But I didn't experience, like, that's not how I relate to the tree. I relate to the tree as something liberatory, as something dynamic. As I said, it's always moving, it's constantly in flux, it's luminous, meaning it's full of light, splendors of light. Some things are real, full of Maya, and some things are full of delusion, full of Mara. And so you have to sort of discern the truth. And so the one thing I like about Buddhism is it sort of posits that you would walk the middle pillar. Well, there's an idea in Kabbalah that the middle pillar is actually one of it's you can well, not everyone's going to agree with this, and that's completely fine. But DCS agrees with me that the middle pillar approach is probably likely the most powerful because you can draw from both polarities, but you will not get fixed in either left or right. You'll sort of bring things into synthesis. In synthesis occurs aggregation. So you have to also bring those aggregates into rectification. So you have to clear the aggregates and synthesize at the same time. So there's an innate self-reflexive, and you could call it like working, like you are path working, even if you're not intending to path work, because you're constantly working on the resolution of these small paradoxes that arise, dialectics, but you're bringing it into the middle always. So that's how I approach the tree. And so for me, I think everybody should study Kabbalah. I really do. I think it provides a great model for understanding reality. I think it provides a great model for understanding yourself. And I think it actually can be, it doesn't have to be fixed in any system, Hermetic, Jewish, Tantric even, although of course I do practice Buddhism. So I do think that's for me, that's the system that I like. So that's the system that I practice. It's the system that I think is the most potent. And so that's obviously, if you are a sorcerer on the carnal ground, you want the system that's the most potent for both magic and your mind. And so that's kind of why I like Vajrayana, and why I like the goddesses, and why I like Sri Vidya, because I think that they are closest to the truth, because that's what Dharma really is, right? It's like the truth, or some people say the law, but it's really the truth. And what is the truth? Well, it's something ineffable. So it's another parallel that Tantra and Kabbalah have, is you're supposed to, the truth is ineffable. So it's all conceptual and it's all bullshit. It's like a mandala. Like, if you've seen the monks doing the sand mandala, and then they wipe it all away. Very similar idea. You draw out the map, create the tree, build it out, talk about it, teach other, not teach people. I'm not a teacher. I just want to be very clear about that. But you discuss it in a way, conceptual way, that maybe people can glean a spark or, a bit of wisdom for themselves, a bit of the luminosity. And so they have to take it and do something with it. And hopefully they build their own tree. And hopefully they continue what we could call the great work, which is of a very practical and speculative Kabbalist, is to constantly be building the tree, pushing it, like maybe burning it, you could say, burning it in a bonfire or a burn pile, if you live on a farm, and but then recreating it anew. But that's also part of yourself, right? So I'm sorry I didn't mean to go on so long about that, but it's very
No.
profound for me.
Yeah, that was great. So, I guess structurally, what does that look like though? Are these 10 goddesses or you map them onto the Sephira, right? Would these be they're not ordering principles, are they? Like how structurally does that look as like a map of the universe? I know that's a huge question, but just like an overview.
I'm going to pull up an image right now.
Okay.
So I think this will actually be useful for people to um, conceptually sort of see what the structure is. So you can see here, there's the 10 goddesses. Um, it's Kali, Tara, Tripura, Lalita Tripura Sundari, Bhairavi, Mahalakshmi. Oh no, that's not Mahalakshmi. Sorry. Um, Chinnamastika with the severed head, Dumavati. There's the widow goddess right there with the winnowing basket. Bagalamukhi with the gold sari, with the hammer, Matangi, and then Kamalamika. So, oh, sorry, I know which one that now it is. So the one directly above the goddess with the elephants, that is Tripura by Ravi, not Tripura Sundari, Tripura by Ravi. And the goddess directly beside her, holding a goad and a noose, a pasha, that is called Bhuvaneshwari. Excuse me, I couldn't think of her name for a second. Bhuvaneshwari, which means the Earth Mother or the bride of the Earth. So you can see there's like even a similarity because Malkuth is often described as the bride of the Earth. So it's structurally it's very similar. The even the idea you brought up of like universal destruction or and also recreation, constantly in flux. Like this is how all dharma, all tantra kind of understands the worlds. We live in a multiverse. Life is a cycle. It's called samsara. Indian tantra and Buddhist tantra, even different kinds of Buddhist tantra, have different ways of understanding what that is. um, I would prefer to go to a non-dual view, but I've tried to go away from that language because I just think conceptually it's very complicated and people have their own ideas of what that means. But basically, you can map each one to a traditional tantric planet, of which there are 9. That's just tantra. Other people's system is perfectly valid. It's just this is how we understand it. So they sort of are the foundation of the world in terms of Maya, in terms of existence appearance, because the dakinis are luminous, and so they are light, and so you have to kind of understand them as stars. That's one way to understand, right? Because they are self-combusting stars. This is a Buddhist way to think of them, as they are self-combusting stars. But in like the more Indian tantra, you can just think of them as supernal to the planets as stars. But they're not quite stars either. So I just want to point that out. Like again, that goes back to like phenomena, excuse me. They're not necessarily phenomena, but they can be represented in phenomena. So that's a really important idea. And then also the Shakti is considered to be both like the creatrix, as well as the liberatrix from the, I'm going to use a pun, the matrix. So she doesn't necessarily create the black cube matrix. It's like a little more complicated than that. It's about her relationship with God and like all these other beings in the universe, which whenever there's a goddess involved, it's really her. There's like one goddess, but it's really she takes different parts in what is called the Leela. The Leela simply means the divine play. She sometimes, this is very Sophia like, sometimes she remembers who she is, and sometimes she doesn't. Sometimes it's very name dependent. So, what I'm saying is there's a kind of weird surreality and flexibility to the world system. Again, a multiverse, there are different realms, there are different beings, there's all of this, but really your primary focus is on this, is on your Ishtadevata, is on your primary deity and how you understand your relationship to her, or whether you consider it a her as personified, or again, her as sort of a conceptual like way to model the universe. Like we'll do Kali, or no, we'll do Tara. So Tara is second. This is the numbering system used in the Todala Tantra. Tara is representative of mercy, very Hasidic, right? Because Hesed means loving kindness or mercy. So she can be described as Hesed. She's blue green. Um, she's the supernal star to Jupiter. She is the fire of perception as well as the ocean of mercy. And you can, ocean of samsara, which is also the ocean of mercy. But you can see her stomach is pregnant. It's called Lambodara or Lambodariya if you use more of the contemporary Sanskrit pronunciation. Not, this is not traditional Sanskrit, but Lambodara if it's more traditional. That means pregnant, pot-bellied actually. So her stomach is filled with the ocean, filled with this ocean of mercy. And she is able to hear. It's a big part of like what Tara does is she's the hearer of the cries of humanity. Meaning like when we pray, what happens? Like who is receiving the prayers? So you could say she is the wife of God. They're all the wife of God, right? But it's God's wife split into 10 forms. And then Shiva, obviously, you can see the corpse under her feet. Uh, that is God in a way. You can say that. So he's the 11th. And so it's their relationship with him, it's their relationship with each other, and it's their relationship with what is called the Maha Smashana. So the carnal ground of ultimate reality. Reality is often understood to be both a garden. You can see there's a lot of verdancy in some of the iconography, but it can also be understood to be the Mahasmashana, meaning the cremation ground, where they would actually cremate bodies in the medieval period. This was considered to be a very, very, very potent place, even though I said the goddesses aren't necessarily the same thing as phenomena. They are said to be able to arise more densely, more potently, more profoundly in certain places, which are called Shakti Peats. This is a more this is a more complicated idea, but the Shakti Peats basically, okay, so you and I have talked about this, how Osiris and Isis have like the story about Osiris's body gets divided into a specific magical numbering part. This is also her story. When she is Umatara, meaning the bride of heaven, specifically this form, Umatara, okay? This is why the names are so important. This is a Puranic story. This does not come from the Vedas. This does not come from the Upanishads. This does not come from the Tantras. It comes from the Puranas. Umatara, she is the daughter of the husk or the demiurge of God. Shiva is God, but because he's an ascetic, excuse me. He's kind of abandoned materiality. That's how it's conceived of anyway. So the whole idea is that she's constantly trying to bring him into reality, trying to bring herself in union or unity, interesting, with herself. Sometimes she knows, sometimes she doesn't. Sometimes she's lost, sometimes she's wrathful, sometimes she's peaceful, sometimes she's blissful. So it's all these conceptual states of being, which also relate to like the human condition. So why am I bringing this up about the Mahasmashana? Because seeing the body in cremation, seeing the process of the fire consume the body is can be understood to be antinomian, but it's really not. It's really not. It's not about animal sacrifice. It's not about even wrathful sorcery on the carnal ground, which is what a lot of people, tantrikas, traditionally would do. Not Buddhist tantras necessarily, but definitely Indian tantras were very much into these, very what they would consider carnal ground practices. It is similar in a way to Vedic rites, but it's bringing the Vedic rites outside of the temple and it's bringing them into the carnal ground, which is an inherently transgressive place. But if you're coming to the view, or you have the view that reality is non-dual, as I spoke a little bit about, or that it is more complicated, we'll say, then it appears as. When you're on the carnal ground, as I said, you're maybe encountering these spiritual forces more profoundly because you're also recognizing them in the process of cremation. So each of the goddesses, very interestingly, can be mapped to a specific point of the corpse in cremation. Like how the corpse is burning, what parts are melting away or exploding or combusting, or if you're saying like one of the practices they used to do in the medieval time was to perfume and write Sanskrit bijas, syllables, magic letters, just like Hebrew letters, very similar idea. You write them on certain body parts of the body, and you do this practice called corpse sadhana, where you sit on the corpse, not have sex on the corpse, or not have sex with the corpse. Sometimes people did have sex on top of the corpse. That is corpse sadhana too, but it's not necromancy or necrophilia. Okay, I just want to be clear, but it's using the corpse as like sort of the conceptual foundation stone. We were talking about this in the chat today. What is the foundation stone of the world? Well, maybe the corpse is the foundation stone of the world. That's one way to think of it, right? And the corpse itself is impermanent, meaning that it is both created and destroyed in this process of life and death, samsara. So you're watching the body or you're doing specific magical practices. It doesn't necessarily have to be about sex. It's just that that's what people often associate with tantra. But there's solitary practices on the corpse, like using corpse sadhana. There are you can just meditate and watch the corpse burn. That's a very valid way to how medieval tantrics would have thought of sort of the way that you access the goddesses was to just watch the corpse burn from not just the point of burning, not just the point of ignition, which is interesting, which is the gold goddess you see holding the hammer, and she's like luminous. There's like a halo, and she's holding the tongue of the green asura. She's at the bottom in the center. That she's the point of ignition. So, like I'm saying, like that, like Tara is the flame of the actual body. It's the flames eating, they're consuming the body.
Is that
Kali,
green guy a corpse or?
so he's an asura. So he's considered to be like a poison or like kind of, it's not a demon, but it's like so this is something very interesting actually, is that the Puranas sort of lay out a cosmological structure of devas and asuras. So devas are the gods in heaven, and asuras are their cousins and brothers, and sometimes even from the same family. Like even the two gods will produce a god and an asura, a deva and an asura. So this is obviously a question like, what is the nature of an asura? Well, asuras are warlike beings that do not possess inherently magical powers, where devas have inherently magical powers. But asuras have extremely powerful physical strength. But if you're looking at a tantric layer, you're sort of like with the mandala, like with what I was saying before, where you push all the sand away. You're kind of accepting the Puranas as reality, quote unquote, air quotes, but then you're also pushing it away. That's what Tantra is. It's ontology. You're going higher. So the Asuras can actually be understood as the shadow or the sort of aggregates of the negative emotions of the devas, of the gods themselves. They actually create these warlike beings with immense physical power. So the Asuras and the Devas actually share a realm in heaven, even though they're constantly at war. So this is a big part of the Puranic stories, is how the goddess usually has to come in and save the day. Not always the goddess, sometimes it's Shiva, sometimes it's Vishnu, but it's really Shakti. It's really the force of God, his wife, who comes in and resolves paradox. And you can see the goddess with her severed head right there she's on the far left side at the bottom. She is actually the goddess of paradox. So there's
Before you
kind of
get
a
too
sorry,
far
sorry about
ahead,
that.
you said you imagine the uh, piranhas, and then you push them away, and you
So you
go higher.
well, you accept that they are real. Like you accept that there's a mythological framework that describes how the multiverse is. Like there are 9 worlds, you could say, 9 layers of reality. It's one very valid way to sort of describe what the Puranas say. So, how do you understand these 9 layers of reality? Well, it doesn't really matter because the goddess is all reality. Because what is she really? She's light. So she's fundamentally Maya. She's fundamentally like both our masslessness as well as the like material reality. Because what is matter? It's just light within a form. That's how Tantra would understand it. So if you're perceiving light, luminosity, from the greater goddess, who again is often conceived of, not always, but often conceived of as the creatrix of at least partly of the multiverse. Sometimes with her husband, sometimes he is the creator, and it depends. It teaches you to be flexible. Just like every goddess, not everyone's going to pray to every goddess. Traditionally, people would just focus on one deity, and you would be able to realize the non-dual nature of reality through intense deity practices with one goddess. Sometimes you might use other ones for what is called prayoga, or like for their power, for their like magical potential. Like you might practice. So if I practice Tara all the time, but then I was like making a real estate deal. Okay. So there's actually a different goddess, Bhuvaneshwari, who is on the right hand side, the second to the farthest right. She's sitting on the dais with one foot down. She is the goddess of actually like real estate and like domestic bliss and houses and agricultural farmland and those kind of things. So wouldn't it make sense like to actually access her power just for a temporary sort of like movement in the universe, like navigating the stars and planets? That would, for me as a sorcerer, that would make sense. So you would go and do that sadhana for a little while, but that might not be your main focus. That's what I'm trying to say. Is that usually you would have a primary goddess who is like leading you through not only the tree itself, but also through the hermeneutic of reality.
Would you go to her because she's almost like an intermediary, like a moon-like
This is a great question.
deity?
It's a great question. So if you so okay, so you're asking me why would I go to Bhuvaneshwari instead of like the goddess that I would normally practice, or are you asking why would I choose the goddess that I normally practice?
I guess in order to interact with like planetary forces, I would think you would want to go with someone like Terra, or because I would relate Terra to a deity like Isis.
So she's definitely very Isis-like, as I told you, and I didn't even really complete that story. I apologize. So there are 51 Shakti Peets. So she gets cut up, dismembered. Her corpse, not her like living self, but her corpse becomes dismembered in 51 pieces using a chakra. A chakra is also a spinning wheel, but yes, it is also the sphere inside of you. But it's in this case, it is the spinning wheel. So it manifests as kind of like a rotating blade, what's called a dipta chakra, a fiery blade that is circular, and it spins and it cuts up her body into 51 pieces, and she falls into these places called Shakti Peets, which around them, so they're temples that have like a shard, you could say, or a piece of her. And Tara's Tara Peeth is what it's called. Her piece is the third eye. So that is what fell to the ground in that specific location. That's what's said. So, but around the temple is this becomes a mahasmashana, meaning cremation ground. So this would be very taboo, very transgressive in like normative Hinduism to actually be in such close proximity to the carnal ground. Like to have the temple almost be the central locus, the mind palace, you could even say, the mind palace arising in the middle of a cremation ground full of skulls, bodies, sorcerers, murderers, crazy people, right? Because it's medieval India, there's not even electricity. So who is going to gather around this temple, this mind palace, you could say, at night would be all these like crazy people and magic and magicians and sorcerers and wizards and all that. So part of why you would choose a goddess like well, okay, so first of all, there some of the goddesses can be exclusively that can be exclusively your sadhana. So if you want to say Tara, I usually place a lot of emphasis on Tara or the one in the very middle at the top, Tripura, Lalita Tripura Sundari. Lalita Tripura Sundari is also a Tara. A Tara. Tara means star in Sanskrit, so you can even hear there's a sort of etymological relationship with Isis, Ishtar, Ashtara, Astarte, etc. I'm not saying they're the same. I don't think that they're the same, for the record. A lot of what Tantra is, especially this kind of Tantra, the image that we're looking at, is about conceptual states of consciousness. So, like a goddess like Ishtar, we'll use that example, who's the goddess of like sex and war and very associated with Venus deeply. And she's more of a worldly. That's how they would consider it. Is that she's more of a worldly force. These goddesses are a higher supernal force. So you basically climb the tree just like a practitioner of Kabbalah or a tantric pasaka would climb what's called the marga. So there are 9 margas, 9 paths for a tantric to sort of undertake. There's 9 trials, you could say. So you would basically relate. Every goddess is related to a planet. So I should have probably started there. Kali is related to Saturn. Tara is related to Jupiter. Tripura, Lalita Tripura Sundari is actually interesting. We won't get into it, but she's related to two. She's related to both the taming of Rahu, as well as as Mercury. Excuse me, I can think of it. Bhuvaneshwari is the not log. No, she is the moon. She is the moon sign. Excuse me. So the moon. The next goddess, Tripura Bhairavi, she is the Lagna, meaning the hour of birth, like the time, like the exact time. Like if you're born at like 9:17, she's like that's what her thing is the Lagna. Then
The
Chinnamasta.
Eastern Horizon.
Yes, exactly. It's more of a right. It's a mathematical formulation more than a specific planetary thing for her. And then you have Chinnamastika. So Chinnamastika, with the severed head at the bottom, she clears Rahu completely from a chart. Like she's the destroyer of Rahu. That's her function. Just like how Rahu has his head severed, well, she also severs her own head. So you can see there's an innate relationship. Then you have Dhumavati. So she's very interesting. So she actually clears Ketu. So Ketu is the smoky tail of the dragon. Dhumavati actually means the smoky faced one or the smoke eating one. So she actually consumes the smoke of Ketu. Then you have Bagalamukhi with the hammer and the gold sari. She is directly related to Mars. Then you have Matangi, who is the green one with the sword. She is directly related to the sun, so the astrological position of the sun. And then you have Mahalakshmi or Kamalatmika. Both names are fine. And she is the commander of Venus. So each one has a direct relationship to, and there are other ones. This is not just because the grouping has 10. And yes, this is true. And this is a great way to do it because then you can model it after the Hebrew tree, right? But there actually are different lists and there are actually more goddesses. They're actually related to what was called the Choseth Yogini cult. So this is a cult of 64 yoginis. with a central figure. So it would be 65. Sometimes it's a masculine Shiva in his wrathful form, where he's called Mahakala, meaning the time king, or it can be a grandmother goddess. We won't get into that maybe, but it is it's a very interesting grouping. And so 64, obviously 10, it relates very directly to this list of 10. So this is just a reduction of those 64 different yoginis, different star clusters who are related to the Pleiades, who are related to the Big and Little Dipper, different sort of asterisms. So they're considered to be above the planets, and they govern the sort of influence of their planet. I'm not saying that they are the planet. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that they govern the influence of the planet on the life of the Upasaka. So, what some people do is they choose a goddess based on the astrological conditions in their chart. So, if you have an extremely ill placed Saturn, well, when it makes you, well, you could, there's actually two ways to deal with this, as I'm sure you kind of recognize, Eros. You can either go full Kali, and your life's going to be really tough. The tantric sort of marga you're undertaking is going to be very difficult, but it could also be very spiritually and materially rewarding because of that. Or you could amend it through Jupiter, through Tara. I prefer Tara because it's more beneficent, or Lalita Tripura Sundari as well, because she has both the power to tame Rahu as well as clear negative Mercury. So you can think of them as like that. They are directly influencing the nature of the planets and even the nakshatra, the stars. I don't know if that responds to what you wanted me to say, Eros. I apologize. I sort of meandered.
No, it's interesting. Um, so 64. Are you saying those are related to the fixed stars or not always?
It's
Because
complicated because this grouping of 64 was probably the original tantric cult. Like when people are talking about like the OG tantra, like what is it? You'll see people on Twitter, sometimes even me, argue about what is the origin of tantra, and I will always say it's the Sadhana Mala, it's Buddhism. There's a reason for this. We don't have to get into it. But the real OG of like expanding the sort of boundaries, becoming limitless, recognizing the universe as like a hyperspace kingdom, as I've called it, or infinite in its potential. This happens with under this cult. So this cult was not strictly Indian tantric, and it was not strictly Buddhist tantric, but in fact, a lot of the yogini cult was Buddhist. Okay, so I know this freaks people out a little, but it makes sense. If you're a tantric Buddhist, you'll recognize like all the goddesses, and they go in specific mandalas, etc., etc. So basically the 64 probably likely represent asterisms, or the potency of the asterisms, or even the sort of nature of reality to be malleable. You could consider them to be sort of purveyors of meta reality. So this goes back to what the word tantra even means. There's one way to understand the etymology of it as tantara, meaning to weave beyond the stars, beyond the stars. So this is very different. And you and I actually have discussed this on a panel, a really good episode, if I do say so myself, where you would challenge me on sort of my astrological conceptions. And so this is why I derive those kind of more radical, what we'll call radical opinions of the cosmology, is because that's how that it is seen. That's how it's understood, is that you recognize that they sort of are the meta reality that exists higher even than what we understand reality to be. So they can influence both the stars and the planets. That's just a more traditional tantric understanding, but yeah, that is how it's understood. The grahas, or the planetary deities, worship at their feet. Just like Shiva, even if Shiva is considered to be the creator of the universe, which is not untrue in a tantric way of understanding, it's just not the full story. But even if you say that, that is God himself, but he is under the feet of his wife. So who is really the supernal power, or the supernal force? Now, you can make an argument that his wife is also his breath, his prana, which is also true. So it's complicated, but really it's in this idea that you can do magic, you can access these beings called dakinis or skywives, and they can change the nature of reality, that you can change the nature of your life. And that is what the marga, the 9 paths of the tantra, especially for this kind of yogini tantra, this is what it's the sort of fruit. You have 3 options, sort of soteriological goals: bhukti, mukti, and siddhi. You can understand this as like bliss, meaning that like you get everything you want in this life. You have a direct dialectical relationship with the deity, meaning that she appears before you. But it's not like how a lot of Western sort of like contemporary New Age people describe it, like someone's like sitting there whispering things into your ear. No, it is specific signs and symbols that you learn to recognize that manifest before you as you are completing certain sadhanas. So it might be something so facile, so simple, so like what they would call like a nothing burger. Like you just like you see. I've talked about this actually with solar before, but when you do a lot of guru yoga, like with this is a totally different practice, it's from Buddhism, but Padmasambhava. So he's considered to be the great tantric of certain kinds of Buddhism. When you do a lot of his guru yoga, you actually sometimes see butterflies. This is considered one of his very important symbols. And I've seen butterflies while I've been doing, not while I'm doing it, but sometimes you will see like a off color or like it will randomly appear. You'll be thinking about it, maybe just peripherally being like, oh, how did I do in sadhana? You'll be kind of like, that's how I think of it anyway. I'm very cerebral. So you're reassessing it, and then a butterfly will sort of appear before you. So these are really important because they actually are sort of signposts or guideposts for the upasaka to keep going, that you are actually like doing something, that you're actually accomplishing something. So the goddesses are much the same. But once you've reached the state of bliss where you can receive everything that you quote unquote want, you're also in this relationship with this deity who's constantly manifesting and appearing before you in very subtle and specific ways. Then you have liberation. So, what does this mean? Does this mean liberation from samsara, from the cycle of reincarnation or rebirth? That can be one meaning. It can also mean you don't come back into the human world. It can mean that you join the retinue, meaning that you become a actual like demon or ghost or sorcerer on the carnal ground, but the carnal ground of the spirit rather than the body. Or there's various other things, but it's pretty much its exit from this world. You could say exit from the hyperspace kingdom into another hyperspace kingdom or another universe or another realm, even. And then you have siddhi. What are siddhi? These are magical powers. So these are different than, there are 2 different lists. There's a grouping of mundane siddhis, meaning that, like, oh, shoot a fireball. But then there are super mundane siddhis. So this is the point of Tantra. The mundane siddhis are not the point of Tantra at all. Some people will interpret it as that, but that's not. Super mundane siddhis are not powers in the way that's like depicted in like Harry Potter. They are like very conceptual, very meta, very different. It's like one of the powers is atomitization, meaning that like you have the ability in your mind, so this is all in your process of consciousness, but you are able to perceive sort of the inner nature, the inner reality of an object. And interestingly, maybe you can even compare this to material science in the 20th century, of like the discovery of DNA, the inner reality of sort of biological creation. You could say that the LSD, now I'm not saying that it's the same thing, but there is an element of like LSD where it's taking you on a forced journey. So maybe you do gain some luminous insight, and maybe you do gain a city or two, and maybe one of those things is the perception of the inner reality of things. So what I'm just trying to say is that the powers that are described as super mundane cities are much more intellectual. They're much more about the nature of reality, and they are much more about like your relationship with it. So it is not exactly like the great wizard king. That's not really what the point is. The point is to to be just to see beyond the veil, I guess, at all times, to be in constant sort of non-dual relations with the world as it is and the multiverse. I know that's kind of heavy, but those are the three sort of you could say primary goals of tantra is like these three things, and they can all be interrelated, and they can actually all be those three things can also be the same thing. So that's you know people don't really understand what tantra is, and tantra is, as I said at the very beginning, it's really the practice of you could say it's like the practice of non-dual Kabbalah, and you're trying to bring things from this life, like your karmas, your past life experiences, your like preconceptions, your klipas, all your bullshit, all of your um, life experiences, traumas, everything. You're trying to bring these things into rectification and synthesis and resolution of paradox. And so the goddess is real in that she can help you. It's sort of as a form of the highest potency, the highest potentiality. Of course, some systems prefer Shiva. So sometimes he becomes the primary tantric deity. Not always. Obviously, we're looking at the goddesses, and I'm saying that there was a tantric cult called the Choseth Yoginis, 64 yoginis, and where the goddess is considered primary or have primacy. Maybe she's not even primary to God. Maybe, as the Buddhists would say, as they often depict, they're usually in consort yoga. So it's called yab yum. So they're together, like usually in sexual union, but not always, but they can be. And all these goddesses can also be depicted in different ways or being understood through their iconography, both subtle and gross, as having a sexual sort of nature with Shiva or the masculine counterpart. But it doesn't necessarily mean sex, as in like the practice of like sexual rituals. It actually refers much more to the polarities and sort of like the uh, how to understand the how to understand the sort of nature of the goddess and her names and what she does, and like relay that to yourself and your own life and see how then you can uh, relate to her better, because you can also understand yourself to be I'm not saying you're God, and I don't think of tantra like this, but this is obviously more Indian tantra. But sometimes the upasaka can also envision himself as the corpse of Shiva, because there's a very famous and important saying in Shakti Tantra, which is the Shakta Tantra, excuse me, the goddess tantras, is that Shiva without Shakti, so the male deity without his female consort, is Shava, meaning a corpse. So, like just like a body must have his breath. So, if the tantric practitioner is a male, so I'm male, so if they might envision themselves as the male principal or male consort, and she is the arising wisdom. Remember, Vidya means wisdom. The
You
goddess is all
imagine
wisdom.
yourself as a dead body?
Well, this is why you would do things like corpse sadhana, or this is why you would do things like cremation ground yoga, meaning like maybe the actual practice of physical hatha yoga on the cremation ground, is because you would um, visualize yourself as Shiva, but sometimes he's dynamic with her. Just like I said, like in Buddhism, they're often dynamic, the masculine and feminine polarities, they're dynamic with each other, they're in sexual consort.
Hmm.
But in Indian Tantra, it's usually the preferences is the female deity is considered to be higher. But yes, you might imagine yourself as a corpse like Kali. When look at the picture, Shiva looks dead. He's a corpse. He's Shava. But then you look at Tara. Actually, Shiva's awake and he's looking up at her. He's perceiving her, and she is actually perception. That is kind of her meaning, her greater meaning, mercy and perception both. So in that case, you could understand him as being childlike, looking up at the Great Mother and saying, like, I need your help. Where the corpse has to be brought into awakening. Kali forcefully awakens her consort. And of course, it's like that for all of them. You can see Lalita Tripura, Shiva is resting on his elbow, meaning that he is in bliss. Like the world is great, it's beautiful. His wife is Tripura Sundari. Her name literally means the Lalita Tripura Sundari, the most beautiful girl in all the three worlds. So why, if your wife was the most beautiful girl in all the three worlds, why wouldn't you be at bliss? So that's what I mean by relationship with the male consort. They have a kind of dialectical and conceptual relationship with each other, which is interestingly how textual tantra is actually relayed, meaning that all tantra is actually discursive. It's actually between God and his consort. Always. Buddhist tantra the same. So there's something in that, something very platonic or neoplatonic or whatever, but it's saying that the magic arises in discourse. So they have a discourse with each other, and that's how the magical practices even came to be. It's just them speaking together, discussing the nature of reality. And one of the ways to understand the goddesses when they appear to you is that they actually will explain or challenge adversarially the nature of your perception of reality. Like what they are is not really, cannot be really understood by a human. Like Chinamastika, I like this example because she with the severed head, and she stands on the bodies of a copulating couple. That's what's under her feet in that picture, if you can't tell. It's the deity Ratri and Kama and Ratri. So
I
the
couldn't
deity,
tell.
well, it's so there it's a basically Ratri is the goddess of carnal knowledge, sexual knowledge, and Kama is the god of sexual desire. So, but it can also be understood as herself, meaning, like I related in a little bit before, the goddesses can be understood as existing as different states of consciousness, even of themselves. So she stands on herself in union, sexual union, or sexual congress with God. So she stands upon him and defeats lust. She stands upon herself and defeats lust. That's what her iconography really means. But some people will look at it and say, oh, she has Kama and Ratri under her feet. She must be the goddess of lust. Well, that's true and not true because she's the goddess of paradox. So you could say that in a way she represents lust, but it's also the liberation from lust. But really, it's more liberation from lust. But you will kind of become to understand lust as existing in a different way, maybe. Maybe your relationship with like sexuality or sex changes as you practice that goddess because she's particularly ferocious. So, one of the ways that actually her yoga is performed or her sadhana is in restriction or denial of sexuality. I'm not saying that's true for everybody. Obviously, there's other rites that are probably very sexual in nature. But I'm just saying that one of the ways that she is understood is actually not as a sexual goddess, but as existing. She's a Virasic goddess, which means a heroic goddess, but it doesn't really mean, it means that, but it doesn't also mean that. It also can refer to someone who's salted.
Or
That's actually what,
willpower.
that's what it is. She is That's why she's victorious over herself. She's taking command of her feelings, her emotions, her physical aggregations, her physical sensations, her physical her sense aggregates. That's what the word I was thinking of. Sorry. Her sense aggregates, pleasure itself. She stands upon pleasure. So what is pleasure in the world? Well, if you've had, so a lot of soldiers would actually practice this, a lot of soldiers and a lot of people who are like criminals or mad geniuses. I'm not being funny. This is like, it's more like people who are like it's a very radical kind of sadhana. So it takes a very radical kind of upasaka, a certain type. And so that would
Mhm.
also correlate to what you were saying before about like why would you choose one specific goddess? Well, they might relate to your type, and I'm not just talking astrologically, but maybe the way in which you live your life is also reflexive or reflected as the goddess. So you
I
would
would
choose one
say
based on that.
too, probably like if you're in your head a lot, you can, some people are more in their head than they are sensory. So I guess the evil genius thing isn't too crazy to me.
Well, that's really interesting, right? Because she severs her own head. But if you look at the iconography, she's not dead. And in fact, if you know the
Right.
story, the textual story, she actually places her head. She restores herself, her head onto her body a moment later. So when she severs her head, it's actually called pralaya. So it is actually the lightning flash, but it's not the lightning flash descending. It's actually the lightning flash of the destruction of the whole universe. Conceptual knowledge destroyed. Of course, it's not just the multiverse being combusted, it's also in your mind, consciousness. So you can understand it like that. You can say she destroys the world, but then it also, she creates the world. You
Hmm.
know, there's a relationship for her because paradox, right? She's both. She's the moment of destruction and the moment of creation.
Is
Just like I
that
said, they
why?
are, sorry, Eros, go ahead. Apologize.
Did you say that she was related to Saturn too as a remedial?
She's Rahu, and then the
Mhm.
goddess above her, Kali, she's related to Saturn as a remedial agent for Saturn. And so you can see that they have, so Kali is the destruction of time. So time has is complicated because can it's definitely related to Saturn. There's definitely like a Chronos, Saturn, time, Mahakala obviously means the great king of time, her husband, or Kala Bhairava, the ferocious king of time. That's another name. Um, those are all interrelated. So she destroys them so then you can understand that the world is also made of spirit. Chinnamastika, the goddess with the severed head, she destroys Rahu, meaning the dragon. So, what is he? He is the impulse to go up or down. He always wants to exist in the world of pleasure, of desires. Obviously, stands on the god of desires. You can see that there's a interesting corollary there. Rahu always he's a very impulsive being. And so she destroys that kind of impulse to just do it's very much of your willpower. That's a very good way to say it, like how you said it, Eros. Like she is the will, like in like Diamond Thunder, pristine force. And they all can be related to moments of time, as I said. So Dumavati is the interstitials. That's the goddess holding the winnowing basket with the dais Pallas behind her. She is the interstitial goddess, meaning that she's outside of time. She doesn't exist in time. She's the space that exists in between creation and destruction. She's kind of like the timeout zone, the outer limits, you could say. And Bagalamukhi is the time of restriction, meaning that I always say like a flintlock. Like if you think of a musket, her she's holds the hammer, she's like holding the lock back, and then it's going to snap forth
Mhm.
and explode, right? So that's kind of her timing. It's like the big, you could say it's the big bang, but it's not the big bang itself. It's actually the force, meaning like the pyroclastic cloud of the big bang. It's the kind of fiery, explosive energy that's produced in the Great Thunderclap or the Pralaya.
Yeah, very Uranian.
She, yeah. So, and it's interesting because you can actually say that Chinnamastika is the goddess of Uranus if you agree with my correspondences of Uranus to Rahu. This is what I think. I think Rahu is Uranus, and I think Ketu is Neptune. So that obviously kept Ketu, I was going to say Neptune, but Ketu Neptune is cleared by the widow goddess Dumavati. So that's why they have an interesting relationship because you have this goddess who's very sexual, who's nude, who's accompanied by these other ferocious goddesses. She stands on this copulating couple. It's she's drinking her own blood. The goddesses around her are drinking her blood, meaning like the lifeblood of the world, the light of the Keter, you could say, or the whatever. It's a descending force, but also the relationship with Ketu and sort of like the relationship of the outcast. So you don't want it. So the whole idea of Dumavati is that you're outside of the rational conventions. So you've broken the paradoxes, like, or you've resolved them at least since in some degree, and then you've gone outside of normative society, and you have to sort of realize that nothing is really real. Now, this is challenging for people, but it doesn't mean that nothing matters. It just means that there's another layer of conceptual reality behind what we actually know. So one is the destruction of conceptual knowledge, and the other one is the destruction of conventional wisdom. So Rahu Ketu. But yes, Uranian. So I just want to say that. Yeah, I agree with that.
Very,
Sorry,
very
I didn't mean to type
interesting.
that. Thank you, Eros. I apologize. I know I'm being very meandering and sort of monopolizing. But
No, it's exactly. I mean, I actually appreciate it. This is like a gold mine of knowledge. Um,
ask me anything.
I, I have so many questions. I mean, so uh, I guess I'll
But
ask,
sorry, Eros, go ahead.
do you personally work with any deities? Like, do you have any favorite deities?
So I tend to keep my practices private. There's like one or two people who even know what like mandala I practice or like what deities I do. I used to post a lot of this goddess named Kurakula. Kurakula is also the, if you look at the middle top, so Shiva on his elbow, and then his wife, his most beautiful girl in the three worlds, arising from his navel on a lotus. That is also a Buddhist goddess named Kurakula or Red Tara. So I'm very fond of that deity. I'll say Red Tara. I'm also fond of all the Taras. There are multiple Taras, multiple stars, obviously, in the worlds, but I'm very fond of her. I do like Chinnamastika, the goddess with the severed head. She's not always depicted with a severed head. Sometimes she's depicted um, in Buddhist iconography a little differently, but she can also be understood as the same goddess. I do like her. I don't work with like I don't like it's not like they're personified for me necessarily. They kind of exist in the meditative practice of them.
Hmm.
They are very much real, but they're also very much dependent on my own consciousness. So
Yeah, that
I
does remind me of another question.
okay,
Uh,
go for it.
Before you had mentioned that the goddesses were you almost indicated, right? Like in Neoplatonism, we would think of the gods almost as like uh intelligibles or planetary forces. I mean, it definitely differs from person to person. Like some people uh would see them as more real than um mechanical for sure, but you had mentioned that they were almost like half mechanical, but half like sometimes they know who they are or something along those lines.
Yes. Okay, this is a great question. So all these goddesses, maybe with the exception of three, they all, well, at least the three, okay, we'll say there are five. So I know there's a grouping of 10, but we'll say there are five who know exactly who they, well, no, we'll say all 10. We'll say all 10 know exactly who they are. They're fully aware of their consciousness. Dakinis are different than goddesses. Like people will think of like for Indian Tantra, they'll think of like Durga riding the lion, or Durga slaying the buffalo demon, or Kali with other, because Kali in this grouping is not Kali of the traditional, how people, even Western or Indian people, both, how they understand Kali. Kali in the grouping is again in relationship with the others, so she is not primary. So they are mechanistic in a way, in that, like Kali, for instance, is the destruction of time, so she is the prime mover, but she herself is not first cause. So this obviously differs from some kinds of Platonism and Neoplatonism, where the destruction of time is considered to be first cause. But they actually distinguish between this, the prime mover and first cause. Tara is actually the first cause because she's pregnant. And then, but the real manifester The real goddess who brings things into reality is actually the goddess in the middle, the one I said I like, Red Tara, or Lalita Tripura Sundari, who is the most beautiful girl in the three worlds, or Red Tara. So she basically is the one who makes reality appear in appearance existence as Maya, as the way it is. So that's also why I like her, because she kind of is like everything that is generative, something that I'm really fond of saying. Like all, I think magic, sorcery, um, tantra, Buddhism, dharma in general, it should all be practices that are generative. Like, what are you creating in your life? Like, yes, of course, you need ferocious practices to protect yourself. We live in a very carnal ground world, a world full of ghosts and demons. So you do need like the idea is that you cultivate the deity, so you also have like supernatural protection, spiritual protection, material protection, all of the three things. So that might not be the goddess for you, but she can also do that function. But they all kind of manifest differently. So she makes time appear. Bhuvaneshwari, the goddess next to her on the dais with the leg, she is the appearance of sort of like life and animals and children and sort of like those other generative force. So I think that all the practice, any practice you do should be generative, should be generating sort of like the thing you like, the sort of like the orderly. It's not necessarily the order because they don't really think of it quite like you do, Eros, but I think your view is valid in the sense that you were trying to at least order the nature of reality in a way that benefits the upasaka, the practitioner. So they are mechanistic in a way, in that they work within a specific parameters of their appearance, meaning their form informs how they will manifest in the world. But they are also they
They're
can also
mnemonics.
arise. Well, that's also interesting because they are also words. That's a very valid way to understand them. Not regular words, primordial words, syllables, which are called bijas in Sanskrit. So very logos, very dialogical again.
Yeah. We also have the planetary vowels, might be similar.
I'm sure they are. I'm sure that there is an overlap. Now, is every list going to be the same list? Probably not. And this is like you were even saying, like different Platonists have different sort of cosmological ordering of the universe. Like this is one list, like I said, from the Todala Tantra. They
Mhm.
order them in a specific way. Kali 1, Tara 2, Triprasundari 3, Bhuvaneshwari 4, um, Lalita, or not Lalita, Tripura Bhairavi 5, Chinnamastika 6, Dumavati 7, Bagalamukhi 8, Matangi 9, and Mahalakshmi or Kamalatmika as 10. Now, this does not necessarily correspond to the traditional Sephiro of the Hebrew tree, but actually you can say it does. It's just you've changed your order of how the light descends. So you can also say that there's something very like trapezoidal, very angular, like how you're understanding the light to refract through the various sort of gemstones. Like we talked about, like how Venus, Netzach, or Shukra, as they would call him in Jyotish, is a diamond. Yes. So all the planets have gemstones, so you can understand the light traveling from Keter, from the crown of God, if you want to call it that, or from unity of the greater cosmos, the hyperspace kingdom, whatever you want to say, that travels down, and then the ordering is how it interacts with each Sephira or Sephira. I don't know. Does that answer your question? Is that like, is that helpful in any way? I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Um, Let me see. I had a list of questions.
Yes.
Well, okay. So I guess can you talk more about how you incorporate astrology, I guess, into your work? And then you've talked about how it incorporates into tantra. Do you also map it to the tree of life? Because I have heard that that's kind of um, debated.
It is debated. It's debated within our own group. And let me just say that I don't think I'm right, or the arbiter of reality for anyone else. This is just how traditional tantric ideas that I'm going to refer to. I think it's okay to map the sort of Jyotish understanding to the tree because I don't think the Sefer Yetzirah is incomplete. I think that like you had a great response to this is like you see it as like the patterning of the universe unfolding. So like the outer three planets, when those got named, they might be real or not real. Whether you believe in the outer space or not, like that's totally up to whomever's listening, and like that's totally up to you whether you believe the planetary bodies are real. But a lot, there are a lot of magicians who agree with me, like I've cited this so many times. I'm sorry to anyone listening, but David Rankin. He agrees with my sort of attributions of the modern planets to the tree, but he also agrees with my Jyotish attributions to the modern planets. So Rahu Ketu is a very interesting sort of formation that I think the Sefer Yetzirah allows for in a way, because it's really about conceptual understanding. I am getting to your question about astrology, like how do I incorporate it? I think of astrology as very conceptual. This is a very tantric way to look at it. It's not necessarily that the planetary bodies are real or not real. They could be, sure. But you're going to understand them as sort of movements of karma and movements of the greater universe or multiverse. So, how are you going to navigate those polarities, those movements, and those changes? Well, hopefully, you will come back to that foundation stone of the mind, and you will, with the deity's help, if you believe in the deity as a completely external force. Obviously, I don't, but I'm just using that for people to understand, is that they will help you navigate those movements, changes, and sort of obstacles that arise before you. So I think astrology is a really useful conceptual tool that is one density, the outer density of what the goddesses represent. Because again, the planetary gods worship at her feet. So what is that saying in iconography and in a textual way? It is saying that the goddesses are in and of themselves supernal, much, much higher than the planetary deities. But you don't have to say that the planets aren't like low or like lesser. You can also say it like they are just the outer vibrational name. And once you get deeper into the core, you're actually going to encounter, that's when things get really interesting. How was that, Eros? What did you think of that first? Incorporating astrology into my practice. I think of it as conceptual. So I think astrology matters, but I think it's also about like the internal, there's like an internal mapping of the planets to the energy centers of the body. That's called the inner understanding, inner meaning. And then there's also secret meaning, like how do you use those things for magic? Well, that's a little different, but it's all related. So I think that there are multiple layers of meaning, like I said, multiple densities. And so I think that the way you incorporate astrology depends on like your level of understanding at that moment.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I completely agree. Um, so okay. The I'm gonna say this wrong, I feel like, but I'm gonna do my best. The piranhas.
Perfect.
Oh, perfect. Um, so you had mentioned, right, like you move past them and even kind of mentioning like these that reality is fake
Not
and
fake. It's real and not real.
real and not real. So is
Both
there
at the
this
same
I
time.
is the idea that w- are you saying there's the belief is that there's something um past this universe, or is it like levels of perception
Levels
or
of perception. That's
levels of
exactly what it
perception?
is. It's gates of perception, doors of perception, if you want to use the Kenneth Grant term. And the different recognition and realization you have that all conceptual wisdom is kind of like putting conceptual wisdom, which is what the goddesses are. They are actually wisdom. They are actually nothing in a way. And I'm not saying nothing as in like they don't exist. I'm saying if you understand them at like more the primordial level, they are just wisdom free in space. But they have come here because we forget. We forget the sort of sophiological principle, the wisdom principle. And so she comes here to tell us this, but that doesn't happen because she appears before you on a dark night in the forest. It happens because you engage with the practices, and through praxis, you gain access to that conceptual wisdom or knowledge or both. So it it really is, it's so dependent on the practitioner. It is very different than like a neo-paganism in that way, where it doesn't necessarily mean like magic. Like a lot of neo-pagans are not necessarily magical practitioners, and a lot of neo-pagans are not necessarily, they don't necessarily have that this they don't believe in the deities having the same nature as that we do. So they would believe it much more as an external force that you offer offerings and is like it takes form. And yes, that's a very valid way. Like we talk about in the group a lot. I try and push this idea of green Tara, which is a little different than the this Indian Tara. This Indian Tara is, her other name is Ugra Tara, meaning this is like a very ferocious Tara, very ferocious appearance. But it is the same deity, but it's again the deity is at different layers of consciousness. So I say like if you cannot really engage with meditation, and this is not from me, this is like from Atisha himself. Like when you read the Tara Sadhana, when you read like the Tara Tantra, like I know Vanessa is like engaging with the text at least right now. And so if you cannot sit there and like do the visualization, do the whole entire sadhana, one of the ways that people, at least initially, you could say this is the first level of the marga, is you sit there and you actually do Tara Puja, meaning that you give her water, you give her lamps, you give her flowers, you give her incense, you give her fragrant water, like different, not like drinking water, but fragrant water, like floral waters, and different kinds of offerings, crystals. I'm not talking neo pagan crystals, I'm talking more of a tantric understanding. But then you also have transgressive or antinomian offerings, which are called the five meats or the five nectars or the five M's. So you have different ideas. So what I'm trying to say is that yes, maybe at the exterior level, the deity actually is a real physical and spiritual form. So that if that's how you have to begin your your like gradient of understanding, your initiatic process is understanding them as real, meaning that they take actual physical manifestation in the world, that is fine. That is the first part of the marga. So sure, you can do that, and then you learn that maybe they actually mean more than that. Maybe they aren't just a physical manifestation, as I was trying to say at the very beginning. Maybe it's post phenomenological. Maybe it's post manifestation. Maybe it's in our own consciousness. So I think
Mhm.
it's reflexive too. Like I think it's a lot about your consciousness. I think that's really what Tantra is focused on. It's like a mind science. Now, different schools will say all reality arises from your mind. I don't particularly take that view, but that is a one way. It's called dhyana, mind only. I'm not a dhyana person. I don't believe the whole reality is just my mind, but I believe it's a interesting interplay of my perception, spiritual forces, my karma, your karma, and also like the aeonic shift. So I know that didn't directly address what you wanted, I think, but I'm trying to get there, Eris, for you.
No, I think that that does. Yeah. Um, I guess is your how do you view your birth chart? Do you think that's who you are or no?
No, for me,
No?
no. I think that it indicates karmic patterns. So I have a very interesting birth chart in the sense that it indicates a certain, it's a very intense birth chart. Like, let's just be honest. I'll just be like really frank for this conversation, just for you, Eros. Usually I don't talk about my own personal astrology, but I don't mind a little bit for this. So I'm a Sagittarius. I've said this many times. No, we're not our sun sign. I agree with that. We're, especially in Tantra, we're our nakshatra as well as our lagna. Those are the three primary sort of planetary positions, as well as the ecliptic, meaning like where is Rahu, Ketu positioned in our chart. Those five things are the most primary. But obviously, the planets, the other planets, and the other stars and the other houses do very much matter. But those are the primary sort of positionalities. So I have a Rahu heavy chart. I have a Jupiter and Mars heavy chart, and basically, I'm a, you know, I'm a, and it does indicate elements of my personality, but I think that my life experience, my like the way I've lived my life informs a lot more, and I think this is true for most people, especially most adults, is that I think that informs more how they are. Because when we're children, we are more expressive in maybe a naturalistic way, and as we become adults, we lose that, sort of childlike nature, childlike wonder of the world, and we sort of like add on all these aggregates, all these traumas, all these relationships, good and
All that
bad.
fragmentation.
Exactly. So, yes and no. I do think that your chart is important, and Tantra, especially Indian Tantra, places a great emphasis on understanding your personal chart so you can navigate the planetary karmas. So, you don't have to come back if you do believe in rebirth or reincarnation. You can actually conquer those conditions so you can come back in a higher rebirth. That's part of what that mukti or liberation sociological goal is to liberate yourself from the planetary conditions so your next life will be a lot more generative, fruitful, and productive, and it won't be so harsh.
Yeah, I could see that. Like, it's more so kind of what you're born into than you usually like if I'm reading someone's chart, I'll try to determine kind of how developed I think some of their um placements are. Have they had hard aspects to those placements from Saturn or from Pluto? Because sometimes those can be very transformative, but um, yeah, I could see that, because when you do perfect your chart and you overcome it, I mean, you could absolutely um, create new meaning if you wanted to. Um, I don't know, because I also do personally have strong feelings about alignment, but that's a very interesting view.
Well, I don't think that we're far off actually from each other. And I think like if you okay, so like barring the severed head goddess who governs Rahu and the widow goddess who governs Ketu. So we're taking them out of the equation for this, just for this. So okay, let's say say my primary goddess is Bagalamukhi. So the yellow, sorry, in the center. Her planetary potency is Mars. Maybe what I need is to actually learn those martial tendencies through her sadhana. Maybe what I do need to do is activate my martial capacity, my martial force, my martial prowess, my martial that Gavratic fire. Maybe that is what will guide me to be in alignment. Because maybe I worship that goddess because I'm like a weak-willed person. This is not necessarily the right match, but you can make a case that this is actually a great practice for that because through her temperance in severity, she will raise the upasaka to be very ferocious or very powerful. So definitely, I think that there's a certain way, a certain view to look at it that you can become in alignment with elements that are either weak or strong, or maybe you have a very strong Mars. So wouldn't it be useful to temper the natures of anything that's debilitated or negative in your chart with the martial fire? Again, you can make an argument that this is this helps you sort of like gain mastery at least of one sphere.
Mhm. I mean, usually if I had a debilitated placement, I would try to focus on the opposite axis. Like I have a 12th house placement, and so sometimes that can be very. It can just get too where you're too isolated or too diffuse, and then you could focus on your 6th house to kind of mediate that, for example.
So this is a lot more basic. I'm just gonna say this, Eros is like a lot. This is much more about the primacy of the sphere itself. So yes, obviously, if I was really good at Jyotisha or like Vedic, or it's not really Vedic astrology, but yeah, it partly is. So we'll call it Vedic astrology. It is that you would be mapping out these kind of interrelationships, and you might actually say, like in a medieval context, maybe not contemporary, but you would say, okay, you need to do a pilgrimage to this temple, this Shakti Peeth, remember, because these are places where the actual parts, the body pieces of the goddess is supposedly fallen. The list is actually interesting because it can be, as I said, 51. That's obviously a magic number. Six. You can see six is Chinnamastika, the goddess with a severed head. So there's obviously like a relationship between her being dismembered and that number six. And then you can also understand it as these are places of immense power. So you could make a pilgrimage to these places. And so at goddess temples and at Shiva temples, these are the only places in India where the nakshatras or not, sorry, not nakshatras, the grahas, the planetary deities are enshrined. They are only ever enshrined in Shiva or Shakti temples. So by visiting certain energy centers on the physical map, the physical cartography, the physical landscape, you can also, in theory, amend those conditions in your own life. That's one
Huh,
idea of tantra. So that's
gotcha.
more complicated. Like you were saying, like using the houses. Like maybe you would outlay a map that actually corresponded to the way that the planets were in conjunction or triadic relationships. So you would organize your pilgrimage to go in a certain shape. Just an idea.
Yeah, I think of like the Pythagoreans and Pythagoreans who, I mean, Hellenistic astrology has like a different relationship where um, the paths between the planets is is the actual meaning, um, and more important than the actual planets and placements themselves, which is pretty interesting. Um,
I saw a comment in the chat, sorry, about this Eros, but I saw a
yeah.
comment. I know the person left, but fly one evil wings.
Hmm.
They asked me to speak about Agni. So this is really interesting. So you can say Agni is the Vedic god of fire. You can say that Kali possesses the tongue of Agni, so her tongue is actually Agni. Like her physical tongue is actually the manifestation of the god of fire. That's one way to understand. You can also see in the center where Lalita Tripura Sundari is, the goddess rising on the lotus from the navel of Shiva. You see the 4 or 5 deities sitting beneath the dais. So this is like the foundation stone, the capstone, you could say. Sometimes these are depicted as the 4 elemental Vedic gods, like Varuna, um, Agni, all 4 of them, plus either Brahma, Maheshwara, Shiva, or Vishnu, depending. So it depends on the iconography, but what this is saying is that the Vedic or Indian elemental gods are composite, like the goddesses are composite of the elements. No one goddess is simply assigned one element. They are all the elements, all of them. All there are 5 elements in tantra. Each goddess is perhaps in proportion. She might have more of a relationship with a specific element,
Can I
which
ask what the fifth
sure.
element is?
The fifth element is Akasha. Well, it's also love, though. It is also love, like the fifth element. Like I always say this in the chat. I know you've heard me say this. It's like just watch the fifth element explains everything, and it does explain everything. It really does. It's like a tantric. I consider it like a very deeply kind of like hermeneutic, like tantric story, whatever you want to call it, sorcerer's journey, um, metafilm, whatever. But the akasha is really important. So akasha is space, but it can also be understood as void, and it can also be understood as memory. So this is also relational to the idea of the akashic records, which is more of a new age conception, but it's not totally incorrect from how tantra would understand it, like a place where the aether wave archive, you could say that, or the I know that there are specific fans of Warhammer 40K, which I never have played. Like I sincerely have never played it. Someone explained it to me. Someone close to me explained it to me once. I didn't really understand, but I understood there was a mythology there. But I forgot where I was going with that. But anyways, the whole thing is like, yeah, there's the idea of the block library in the web way. So in 40K, I think that's what it is. So that is what it is. It's kind of the you could say it's like the collective unconscious. You could say it's the all the ideas that we've ever had before stored in this like interstitial actual library. Maybe you say it's digital. Maybe we created the Aether Wave or the block library. Maybe that's what the internet even is. Maybe that's what like Anna's archive is. Maybe that's what the internet archive is. Like, all of these things, maybe that's what it is. It's like the digital archive is also the Aether Wave, and it is also the archive itself.
Every Reddit post ever.
Exactly. Because have we really every civilization believes that they understand the nature of the cosmos, and sort of like their especially like institutional religions. This is very like I love to talk about this because it's very aeon of the daughter in a way, or aeonic, is that institutional religions love to, because of the nature of an institutional religion where it has a physical body, meaning the church or whatever the institution is, it stays more fixed. So it has a more fixed idea of the multiverse. But as I said, if you agree with the tantric model, and you don't have to, of course, and we live in a multiverse, how if you remain fixed, then how are you ever going to know what something is if you only can see it from one angle or one view?
Absolutely. Yeah, which is kind of like how you were talking earlier about the masculine and feminine duality, and you were saying that there's probably something deeper there, and I think that there is something between two and cognition for sure.
Well, that's interesting that you even use that word, because you could say that cognition is described by Lalita Tripura Sundari, aka my favorite goddess, Red Tara or Kurkula, who is the goddess on the lotus arising from the navel of Shiva. You could say that she is the process of cognition and metacognition. And then there's a direct relationship between her and the goddess with the severed head, because the goddess with the severed head is destroying all forms of conceptual knowledge, meaning that the words, the containers that we use to describe the universe, she makes it all explode. Apocalypse and revelation at the same time. So we have to discard it, and we sort of have to reform what we then know or perceive the universe to be. So yeah, I think that there is I think it's directly related to, as I said, processes of consciousness. And one thing that you said that I was really interested by was the idea of Pluto. Now, this is contentious, but I actually think that Pluto can also be Shiva, but it's not Shiva as like the god as most people know him. It's more of an inner tantric meaning. And I think that when he is plutonic, he actually becomes the slayer of death, this deity called Yamataka, or Vajrabhairava. It's another kind of name, which means the Diamond Thunder Terrifier, or the Diamond Thunder Terrifying King. And so he slays death because he also is death. He recognizes himself in perception as that figure. He creates death as God, as the creator of the world. He creates a paradox, but he resolves the paradox by slaying death. And how does he slay death? Just like Chinnamastika, he severs the head of the buffalo god Yama. Yama is the god of death, the god of the underworld. So he slays that god and then becomes that he becomes higher, a higher ontological force,
Yeah.
liberatory.
And it makes me think of Scorpio too, because that's like a big element of Scorpio, right? And I know traditionally Scorpio is Mars ruled, but you know my how I've talked about the linear unfolding idea, and I do attribute Pluto with Scorpio above all, and that's what Scorpio does. It almost kills itself, you know, like it does have many miniature deaths, and it purifies in a way in doing that, and it's not afraid to do that. It's like just kind of a natural mode where it's um, just purges.
What if I told you, Eros, that there's actually a traditional tantric association between what we would call Pluto and Scorpio? The idea of the Slayer of Death being associated iconographically with scorpions is very well documented in both Indian and Buddhist Tantra. And I actually think this was the more original understanding. I don't know if they called it Pluto. Maybe they understood it more as like a Mars, sort of like like the secret shadow planet of Mars. And it is said, sometimes people do say this, is that Ketu, the smoky tail of the dragon, loves to pretend to be Mars. So in a way, you could say that there's like this relationship between like Mars and death, but I actually like the attribution of Pluto. And I think this actually makes a lot more sense because the Mahasmashana, the sort of cremation ground, either at the end of the world or of ultimate reality, it can be either or both, is not considered to be consumed by fire, to raise the question of Agni again. So I think that I don't think that I think you're totally on is what I'm trying to say. I think that there's a system here. I think that it's not about like you were saying. It's like it's both a linear unfolding, but it's just also there is a verticality, right? Because if we're
Mhm.
thinking of it in my way, we're walking on the middle path, meaning we're bringing the extremities maybe into synthesis and rectification as we walk up together ourselves, but we're also there at Keter at the same time. So I agree that I think that what you're talking about is actually the traditional way. I'm just going to go out on a limb and say this. I know people are going to be like, "Oh, that's not material based and whatever," but I think that Rahu Ketu are dragon planets for a reason. I think they're flexible because that dragon is a serpent, so they are inherently flexible, and I think that they are intended, encoded, you could even say, to relay these kind of complex meanings and also just like the Kabbalistic tree of life, they allow for correspondences to be placed there. So I actually agree with you. I think Pluto and Scorpio. I think Pluto is Scorpio. Excuse me. Scorpio is ruled by Pluto.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely similarities between Pluto and Mars, right? Like I would say that they both kill in different ways, and they're both warfare in different ways. But um, I would say like Mars is like visible warfare and like actual physical aggression, whereas like Pluto is more psychological. And so in that way it could be more like a layered meaning where maybe at a certain maybe at one point they were layered together, but I can't think, at least in Western uh thought, where that would have happened, because I guess I just don't see Aries or Mars that way. But
I agree though with that what you just said. I think it was really profound. It actually was that Mars is the battlefield density. That is the death. That's death on the battlefield. The
Mhm.
battlefield's also a carnal ground, but it's a carnal ground of our own creation. We're very much in control of where battlegrounds, well, maybe not we, you and I, but in general, humanity is in control of where the battlegrounds occur. So that's a very interesting idea. And then saying Pluto is the conceptual or post conceptual sort of carnal ground, the carnal ground at the end of the world, like where God, quote unquote, God, Shiva, um, Vajrabhairava, where he goes to view himself, to see who he is. And he realizes that he is death. And in order to sort of get to the next layer of reality or the next hyperspace kingdom or to unlock the door, Pluto can, I often like to say this about Pluto, is that it's very much like a key. If you watch Sailor Moon, you'll understand what I'm saying. Sailor Pluto holds a giant staff that is a key. And what is the key is it has a heart in it. Well, it's a very interesting Kabbalistic idea, is the heart as the cause of knowledge. So I think that absolutely the Pluto is post-conceptual. So it's the death. It's like it's what is death? Is it death of the body? Is it death of the spirit? What is that? Is it death of the mind? Can the mind
Death
never
of
die?
meaning?
Exactly. Conceptual. I think it's all of it. So I don't
Yeah.
think there's any paradox with what you're saying, and I totally agree.
I feel like so much too, there's such duality of spirit and soul. I don't know whether that's part of Tantra, but you could even say like that Mars is the spirit kind of aspect and Pluto is the soul aspect.
So I don't want to, I personally don't believe in a soul, Eros, but I definitely believe, like, I believe in a soul. Like, I don't believe in a fixed spiritual body. I don't think that when you are in spirit, you are necessarily fixed. But I don't think that when you leave your physical body, I don't necessarily think you've like transcend, like a lot of religions believe that through death you sort of transcend a layer of reality. I would describe it as Tantra would describe it as you would transition into the Bardo state, into the sort of conceptual layer, the ghost worlds you could call it. So you transition through the smoky kingdom. You sort of have to pass through. Some people end up living on the carnal ground of the Bardo, meaning that the ghost worlds, there's a whole other reality behind the body, but that is not the truth of reality either. It's both. We are both matter and spirit, and neither of them fully encapsulate who we are. I know this is going to be very, but I just think that we are not fixed. So I don't like to use the soul necessarily as a way that I describe it. That does not make it wrong. This does not mean that I don't accept some of the ideas of like what a soul complex is and like some of the more Egyptian or more left hand path ideas. I actually do accept a lot of that thinking. But it's very hard. Again, we're using conceptual language, so it can be very difficult to relay um, these kind of like very complex topics. So I would say that the goddesses, it to me, and maybe more of a Buddhist view, is that they do not relay a fixed state of reality. So there's no fixed soul, meaning that the person that you were in your past life, if you want to use rebirth or reincarnation, is not the same. That might be you might be made of the same composite parts, meaning that it might be a spirit that you've kept with you for like 10,000 lifetimes. But let's say you were a fox in the last life, or a vampire, or a sky witch. You can be all of those, or a Buddha, or anything. Like, how much of that is in your perception now? What are your memories of those things? How real is that? Because you hear this with a lot of people talking about past life stuff. Are they Cleopatra reincarnated in America in 2026 to give us starseed messages? I'm a little skeptical of such things personally. So for me, I believe that we are not the same thing. We shouldn't identify with either the body or the quote unquote soul, but I prefer spirit. But those are also things that inform our sensory interaction with both realities, meaning the reality of flesh and the reality of the spiritual world. I prefer to think of it as non dual. I prefer to think that we are both and post. But I understand that from a Western perspective, that people often find this very unsatisfactory. I also, in my teenage years and early 20s, found the Buddhist explanation a little extreme and still do in a way, but I think it's more an issue of translation and also instruction rather than the Buddhist view actually being extreme. I think that it's actually true that we are both and post. So I'm not looking to necessarily escape the body in this singular lifetime. And just like I'm not looking to escape the carnal ground as I transition to the Bardo state whenever I happen to do that, I think it's useful to sort of, if you can, cultivate a spiritual practice that allows you to sort of conquer both worlds, to be victorious over yourself so you don't have to relive those old karmas. Like, for instance, I know this has come up before. It's like, what is the nature of, what is the, so if I had a rebirth, if I was reborn, if I was like, okay, so I'm the Monkey King reborn. Everybody knows Wukong reborn. Okay, haha. But what if I was like a woman in a past life? I'm not saying a recent past life. I'm saying like like a couple lifetimes ago. I had the whatever karma to be reborn as a woman. In what way does that inform my life now? Does that mean I should become a woman because I was a woman once, 300 years ago, or in a different multiverse? To me, no. I just think that it is, but I do think there's a transformative element that is really important. But I think that transformative element happens, number one, in your consciousness, rather than it's not so much about reliving those past lives. And then also like looking at yourself and saying, what are the things that I need to reconcile, reconciliation of paradox, and also conquer so I don't have to relive them. Maybe the thing about being reborn as a woman gave me a more feminine intuition, but maybe that's not been useful for my life because I've largely ignored it. Right? No, I'm just using any example. I'm just using an example. It's not necessarily the example of my life. I'm just saying that if I never use it, well, why would I want to carry it with me through time and space? Or maybe I do want to carry it with me through time and space. So wouldn't it make sense to then cultivate it to the point where I am utilizing it to its highest capacity, highest capability? That also, again, does not mean I become a woman. It means that I cultivate it in my consciousness.
Yeah, I think I tend to agree with you actually. I mean, the Western view is like the three, so the body, the spirit, and the soul. And so I tend to see it as like your perception of yourself and your perception of the universe to an extent. Like, so the soul being, um, like a composite of meaning, and then the spirit being, yeah, like how you see yourself, how you structure yourself, and your like virtue, and your boundaries for yourself, and stuff like that. And I think that both of those are change, like you change and you adapt. Um, but I do kind of believe in K2 as, you know, I do think in terms of like karma to some extent, like that we do um, sometimes have some of these past life things attributed to us and some ancestral things attributed to us because obviously a lot of our inner meaning gets um, created during like our formative years with our families. So I don't think it's it's too far off from what you believe. And I believe the same, like you would adapt to kind of overcome it and kind of create what you want for sure.
Exactly. You're not fixed in either your desire, your will, or your aggregates. You're able to clear those if you so choose. Not everyone wants to, right? Some people are comfortable in them, and that's fine. I don't tell anyone what to believe. I don't think that I'm the arbiter again of the truth or of tantra or of the ideas of the realm system or of the nature of the body, mind, body, spirit, or soul, body, spirit. I prefer mind, obviously, but tantra also posits as three. Obviously, I talked about bhakti, mukti, siddha, city. There's many other kind of pairings of this like kind of trinity. Um, you see this very, very frequently. It's a very important tantric idea. Even the goddesses, Kali number one, Tara number two, Tripura Sundari number three. Well, there you have the sort of formation of the world as we know it, the destruction of time, meaning that how we move through time. Tara is the capacity, infinite capacity for growth. So very Jupiterian. And Lolita Tripura Sundari is the words, the names that we call things. So that's basically the world in a nutshell, just through those three. So,
Mhm.
you see these kinds of parallels and references to Platonism and Neoplatonism throughout Tantra and definitely throughout Kabbalah as well. So I think this is like the underlying backbone to reality, as Matt Murrow would say. It is kind of there's a structure there, but how much do we understand the structure? How much are we able to access? How much do we place emphasis on one specific formation of the structure?
Right. Well, yeah, I think that's why it's kind of awesome how you had mentioned earlier that you, like, one of the first things that you did was map the goddesses onto the Sephiroth, and you did it in a unique way. And, I think people can sometimes fall into being dogmatic, and um, I think that it's okay to trust yourself and your own intuition and your own knowledge sometimes. And, um, you know, even this idea of like improving on past ideas, like someone didn't just pick a philosopher and then just like follow that philosopher forever, right? It's like it was kind of this idea where you would build off of the previous philosopher and deepen the ideas and tweak them. And um, so I kind of like that approach to things. And yeah, I like it when people take that approach.
As you know, I think it's very good. Thank you, Eris. I think it's very good to be flexible. Not necessarily that you lose your standpoint or your sort of ontological ground that you believe in. Like you should have like a not necessarily a fixed opinion, but you kind of have like a set of beliefs that you relay to and that you are reflexive with. So this is an interesting idea that you brought up, the sort of like trusting yourself. Well, there's a deep idea in Buddhism that the inner guru, meaning not the teacher who teaches you things necessarily, but the inner guru is in that self reflexivity. That does not, I'm not saying, so for anyone listening, I am not saying it is higher or even higher than the physical teacher or that it is yourself, quote unquote, air quotes. I don't think that. I don't think either of those things. But really, the meaning of the guru, the teacher, is in the self reflexivity. That is the real meaning. It is in that a capacity to reflect on your own life, your own ideas, your own thoughts, and yes, destroy and create them anew as like the path unfolds before you. So I agree with you 100%.
Beautiful. It's like Carl Jung, and well, he would say you birth your own God and then you kind of raise it inside of you. That's I know that's a real wild idea, but I really like that one.
I
I
don't think that's wild. I think
no.
that's what the goddesses are. They arise in your consciousness. You nurture them through the practice, like through actually doing the practices, and they increase in potentiality in your own life. Don't think it's crazy at all.
Yeah, I love that. Um, all right. I'll ask you one more question, and then I realize I've taken so much of your time at this point.
It was an amazing
So thank you.
conversation. Thank you so much, Eros, for having me on and for allowing me to meander and be a little very speculative, very conceptual, and like very wordy. Appreciate it.
Oh, it is so awesome though. Like I really hope that anyone that does want to learn about Buddhism and Kabbalah and Tantra, I mean, they're going to have so many, people like myself are going to have so many places to go down the rabbit hole. So it's very exciting. And I thank you again. So, do you believe in the idea of like the higher self or the daemon or the higher guardian angel or whatever you would like to call it? And I was also going to ask like, you know, how would you feel about synchronicity as well? Because to me those ideas are kind of intertwined.
So I do believe in like the as I said, like the god if you want to say goddesses, we'll just use the 10 because we discussed them all night. So you could say that that is your higher like that is your HGA. But like there are different conceptual layers. Like every goddess that that the image showed of the 10, they actually have multiple forms, every goddess within them. They actually each have 108 or sometimes even 1008 different names. So you could say that there are certain vibrational levels that you want to like reach. Maybe your goal is apotheosis. That's one idea in tantra, certain kinds of tantra. So maybe the idea is to become like to possess the body of the deity, whether it's a goddess or a god or whatever it is. Like it has to be a tantric deity. This is the other thing about the Puranas is like when I was saying throw them away, maybe I didn't exactly formulate that properly. But the idea is that the goddesses are ontological, so they actually transcend the cosmological reality of the Puranas. So I would say that there is an HGA, but it's higher than maybe where Crowley would place it at Tiferet or at Keter, depending on who you listen to. But I think that there are like other states of being. Like David Hyam Smith talks Ein Sof Or. He thinks that all paradox is resolved in that layer of the tree, which is higher than actually Keter. But you could say that the tree actually extends up there, depending on how you understand the tree to like how big you understand the tree to be. I think that both ways are actually perfectly valid. I don't really have a problem with either of them. I think that when you are doing hardcore sadhana, you are experiencing a lot of synchronicity. And I don't think it's all necessarily about um, like believing every single thing. Like things might happen in sadhana that will seem insane, that will seem like really shake you or really throw you off. Maybe you'll see like a full on spiritual manifestation happen in front of you, like in front of your face. And I'm not talking about just in your mind. I'm talking about like a blazing fire before you, some like a being or something like that. And so that's not necessarily the HGA either, is what I'm trying to say. So synchronicity is real. I believe that this is one of my crazier theories, but I'm going to throw it out there because you're a part of our group. Vanessa's part of our group. Cassandra's part of our group. I see Sahara in the chat, obviously. Universe Unveiled. What's up, Sahara? But you basically, I believe that the internet is the ipsos. I think this is where the nexion is formed. I think that this is the aeonic idea is that we are people are there are specific people that are meant to meet that are would be either would be impossible to meet otherwise. I think that this is like sort of a cross karmic connection, and I know that I personally have felt it for specific other people, and I don't know if they believe that or not or whatever they believe, and that's fine. that is totally fine. I've learned to accept that it does, to a degree, it's based in my perception, but it also has to be shared. But I think one thing interesting about like our group in general, like how we all sort of connect and came together, is that we all, to a degree, have this opinion that like we're all kind of speculatively psychic on the internet, or speculatively psionic on the internet. So I believe that for me, that is the most important synchronicity, and it has been almost the most transformative thing probably since COVID for me, was to meet certain people, have them challenge and act as both a friend and adversary, and occasionally more, not lover, but I'm just saying occasionally more, as in like I have certain deep friendships that have like legitimately changed my life forever. So, including you, Eros, and like that episode that we did on a different show really challenged me in a way, because I had to, in real time, defend a lot of my ideas. And you were so quick to sort of uh, give me the platonic sort of paradox that would, like, I would have to be able to try and resolve it articulately without being a mycog. And that is a challenge. Like, that's hard. It's very hard to do rhetoric properly. And so that's
That
what
was a great
synchronicity is for
episode.
me. That was a great episode. It really was. Should have been the number one episode on that channel, to be honest. I'm serious though. I think it was really strong. When I've listened back, I've listened to it like 10 times. I'm like, wow, that was actually really great, because so many interesting things arise in discursive fire. And that's where the lightning is. That's where the lightning strike happens. It's like in our perception, it's with each other. That's why I place a great deal of emphasis on Tara and this idea of infinite capacity for loving kindness. That doesn't mean that we're innately born and we're just going to be like, oh, so extremely like we're doormats, and that we should accept. Like being boundaryless, or to accept like other people's bullshit. I don't think that, but I do think like infinite capacity, meaning we get to choose to enact bodhicitta in the world if we so choose. We might not choose that, but I believe that we have the capacity to choose that. Now, what does the world look like if we all did that? I don't know. It is, in my opinion, it is not kumbaya, um, fire circle, but it could be. So I believe that we should actually actively cultivate the idea of loving kindness, at least in our minds, if not in our daily lives. But of course, enacting bodhicitta is the most powerful sort of karmic remedy that there is. So if Tara represents loving kindness, then Tara should be the sort of that should be a primary, at least, idea or vehicle to carry us into the aeon, and however you understand that.
I said that that was my last question, but I actually have one more.
Okay, go for it. No problem at all. I love this. This is like really fun Friday night for me. Thank you so much, Eros.
No, thank you. Okay. Is there anything that you've learned recently that you're really excited about?
I'm excited by everything. Lately, I'm very intellectual. I'm very cerebral. Easily intellectually stimulated by interesting ideas, even if they're challenging. So I think right now I'm interested in this idea of Zimzum. DCS, David Heim Smith, talks a lot about this kind of perpetual expansion, not perpetual, infinite contraction and expansion of the universe, which is very much like the relationship between Mars and Jupiter, or Saturn and Neptune. So I think that that's a really important idea in like modern Kabbalah. I think another idea that I've been thinking about is Zephyr, which is obviously not my idea. It's Solar's idea. It's more of a contemporary left-hand path idea, but I do think it has a lot of validity. I think that the thing is like often feel challenged sometimes by like these other ideas of the tree because my experience is so free form. Like my experience is like free form jazz. Like that's how my Kabbalah is. Like Matt was telling me this like literally either this morning or last or yesterday. He was like, Jin's Kabbalah. Like, what is Jin's Kabbalah and how do you define, describe, and relate to it? And I was thinking, like, yeah, I do relate to it, like very like how I am, a little bit chaotic, kind of free form, artist, speculative, a little bit of a poet, and like people who are more like people who are have a different experience or different like life, the way they navigate their life is different. They're not going to be, they might have more of a class, they might be classical music, right? Like symphonic music, or they might be drone rock or drone metal, or they might be vaporwave or shoegaze or whatever. It's there are different frequencies for different people. So I think that, I don't know if that answered your question, but I just tend to relate to things as being like kind of unfolding. And so Zimzum, to me, is the most profound of this idea. I think that the other thing that we talked a lot about, yeah, the other day and maybe for the last few days, is the idea of emptiness and like how we were talking about the pomegranate as the metaphor for Kabbalah, as well as the metaphor for Tantra very broadly. And I think one of the ideas that I find most profound, it's not necessarily a new thing that I've been thinking about, but it's every time I hear it or hear myself even say it, I get like a little of that shiver, and I'm like, that sounds really close to the truth, or as close as you can speak it. Is that the truth really exists in the empty space between the arrow and the pith? So it's kind of like the secret behind material reality doesn't really isn't is neither contained in spirit or material reality itself, but in that secret third thing, maybe that is the mind. And what is the nature of the mind and how does that relate to reality? And so I think that that is a very profound thing, that real non-dual wisdom, non-dual knowledge, not just wisdom, non-dual knowledge actually arises in emptiness, luminousness, and masslessness. So maybe we are just star seeds, Pleiadian, dark, yeah, or whatever. Maybe we're all like Aryan, Hyperborean. I don't know, but maybe that's what it is. And if that is what it is, then Hyperborea forever.
That's awesome. Yeah, that third space, the whisper in the emptiness.
That's very profound what you just said, because sound is the only thing that can capture or be or can transform space is sound. It's the only thing that is carried through it. And sound is also light. So in Dharma, Buddhist Dharma, we would say all, even in the darkest of darkness with no outer luminaries, it is still possible for the primordial, infinite, or lightning flash, all three ideas are in Buddhist Tantra, to arise in your consciousness, but also in the darkness. And that light is also a word. A word is also a sound. And if we understand that in a non dual way, maybe that is what allows us to be victorious over reality.
That's so beautiful. I love that. I guess that is a great place to end it on that because I might have to clip that. That was great.
Well, I
Um,
hope you do, because I love to be, I love my little mic drop moments.
all right. Well, thank you so much. I mean, I feel like I just got a dissertation on Tantra Buddhism. Like this is a PhD. I just got a PhD. So thank you. Um,
Well, I appreciate that. I'm not a teacher. Nobody take what I say literally. It's just conceptual. I'm just a speculative Kabbalist. I'm a practical tantric, but a speculative Kabbalist. Just take of the ideas as you understand them. Don't try and, you don't have to replicate the Marga as exactly as I'm describing it. Go read the text for yourself. Go do the practices for yourself. I'm a big believer in that. Tantra arises in practice. Um, so this is just one model of the universe. Just keep that in mind. And I'm nobody's teacher. I'm just a sorcerer on the carnal ground, trying to my best to articulate reality as I can.
well, maybe not a teacher because you always say that, and so I feel like there's a reason for it, but definitely a wealth of knowledge, and you end up teaching people a lot. So, um, do you want to plug anything before we end?
I will absolutely plug Threshold Saints and the Grey Lodge. You can check me out at thresholdsaints.substack.com or at the Grey Lodge at the true TRVE greylodge.com or on our YouTube channel, The Grey Lodge, which is run by Mr. Matt Murrah. Thank you so much, Matt, who is our webmaster as well as the YouTube channel coordinator, social media coordinator. And, I'm really excited and very blessed to have three brothers and one sister now who kind of get it. Like we all have our very different perspectives, but it kind of makes sense. I feel like we agree more than we disagree. So I highly recommend everything Eros has done. I'm so glad that you are in my orbit, my sphere of dialogue. I really care about our friendship. I feel like a profound connection, Eros, and I hope that uh, you know being in my orbit is generative for you. And I thank you for appreciating the kind of wild Mahavijja stuff. I have not done that stuff in 3 years. Like I have not really discussed the goddesses since I did their initial episode. So I was a little rusty thinking about all the sort of conceptual ideas that I relayed in these multiple series that I did and on other shows. And so thank you so much. It was an incredible space. I appreciate that you opened it up to me and that you wanted to interview me. Like, who the fuck am I? Like, that's how I feel most of the time about everything. About like people ask me on other shows sometimes, and I'm very lucky to be able to do it. And I never really say no. But I always feel like, who am I? Who am I really? I'm just a speculative Kabbalist, and I don't really feel like I even know that much, but I feel like I have contact, we'll say. I have had contact with maybe more non-dual wisdom. Like, if you want to call them the Dakinis or the Skywives or the goddesses, like, yes, that's a Twitter bit, but to be honest, it's also true. I have seen them, so you can understand that however you want. And I'm just trying to maybe understand my relationship to them through these broader dialogues. Thank you so much, Eros. Really appreciate it. Hugely, immensely grateful. And, for everybody in the Grey Lodge, it's a weird crew, but honestly, some of them are just incredible. I think everyone is an incredible person, and I wouldn't have added them or been around, attracted to them, or wanted to be in dialogue with them if they weren't.
Yeah, I love the Grey Lodge. Great people. All right. Thanks so much, everyone, for coming. Thanks so much again, Jin, for overflowing your wealth of knowledge. And, you know, I think that everyone who watches this will understand why I interviewed you because you are such a wealth of knowledge. So thanks for sharing. And again, thanks everyone for coming. See you next time.